Ask around a bit for people's favorite Alien game, and there's a good chance most would say Aliens vs. Predator 2. Ask the same for a Predator game, and it's likely you'll get the same response. Ask for their favorite Aliens vs. Predator title out of any medium, and again, good chance you're hit with the answer of AVP 2. And yet, this 2001 title currently sits in the unfortunate table of abandonware, unavailable for digital distribution and barely playable on modern machines, and even then with frequent crashing problems. Hint, this game does not like human interface device compliant software enabled on your device manager. Thus, despite being genuinely beloved by fans, this is one of those titles that, as of making this critique, seems doomed to be forgotten. But why was this title so beloved, and does it deserve such praise? Well, let's look into it. Aliens vs. Predator 2 was developed by Monolith around the same time as their work on another cult classic FPS titled No One Lives Forever. Veterans of FPS development, they tended to know what they were doing, and much of that knowledge shows in the design of this game. More, they were becoming adept at integrating story into the gameplay and bringing to life fairly memorable characters, even with limited screen time. Unfortunately, the one aspect their veterancy did not keep up with was graphics, which looked dated even for the time and worse even than their other titles. Characters are blocky and expressionless, and don't get me started on their attempts at flora within the game. They even went with an odd choice of color saturation, which made the world resemble the brightness of a comic book, though I installed a texture pack to tone this down a good bit. If there was a saving grace in this regard, it would be the lighting which, while primitive today, can make for a genuine creep factor which the level designers were fortunately clever enough to utilize. On the other side, you have the sound, which is of surprising quality, with effects taken straight from the films, some decent voice acting which avoids some of the cringe common for the time period, and a solid soundtrack unique to each of the three characters you play. This is a title that is a joy to listen to. Mostly. With the number of sounds available in the game, it's not altogether uncommon for the engine to become overloaded and simply be unable to play some of the sounds. And while you can increase this threshold in the menu, it's an issue which still tends to rear its ugly head when too much is going on at once. As well, while the soundtrack is solid, the combat music has a tendency to kick in before you even detect an enemy, often giving you ample warning that you're in danger a couple precious seconds before you should know better. As to the gameplay and story, like the previous title, this is split into three very different campaigns, often with their own strengths and weaknesses. Unlike the previous title, this game actually has a story, a rather decent one even, with each of the campaigns frequently running into one another or referencing each other. Let's get into them one by one. We'll start with the Marine, who, like the previous title, should be your most familiar starting point, despite his story beginning last chronologically. You run, jump, crouch, shoot, pick up armor and health packs when low, and have a familiar stable of weapons, especially for those familiar with the series, with a couple changes from the previous title, most notably the secondary function of your guns. For starters, you actually have a knife in this game. Not really useful outside one instance in the campaign, and maybe freeing yourself from a predator net, which won't be happening. And good luck trying to utilize this thing on non-human opponents, but hey, it's the thought that counts. Next up is your standard handgun, which is like the knife, only ranged. Again, it'll come in handy during a short stint later, and other than that will never be utilized, even upon picking up its secondary ammo-piercing rounds, which do more damage and can harm bullet-resistant opponents. After that, though, we're on to your meat and potatoes. The M41A pulse rifle is your workhorse, moderately effective against most opponents with a deadly edge in its grenade launcher. It will be with you for the majority of the game and works as your true sidearm, though if there were to be a secondary sidearm, the shotgun would fit the role nicely. Capable of destroying softer targets at close range in one blast, it will make mincemeat of most opponents you come across. Against the rest, you can load in slugs, which makes the weapon serviceable against anything in the game. From there, though, we get to our true primaries, the weapons used when things are hot and you need a lot of things dead yesterday. The flamethrower is one of the better in gaming I've seen, with a moderate range and ability to cook all but the heaviest targets in a split second, often multiples at once, making for a fantastic shield against the throngs of incoming aliens, though it's effectively useless against the few heavy targets you encounter. As a bonus, unlike the previous title, it won't cook you if you happen to so much as move while shooting or touch an engulfed enemy. Then there's a smart gun, the automatically targeting mobile death turret, whose auto aim can be turned off if you should feel so inclined, which makes mincemeat out of everything in front of it. It struggles a bit more against armored opponents, but even Praetorians can't stand under fire for overly long to these beasts, and in a few levels it will more than likely easily serve as your primary death dealer. Its one true weakness being how quickly it will eat through your ammunition stores. From there, the weapons get into more of a utility and support role. The grenade launcher won't see much use outside a couple sequences where you find yourself running from the hive, at least not in the single player. Timed grenades aren't much more useful than the pulse rifle's launcher, while the proximity and spire mines, while both useful in a couple key situations, and both effectively the same thing, won't see much use outside of that, in part considering the weapon disappears halfway through the campaign and doesn't show up again until it's far too late to be useful. Then there's the EMP grenades made to stun enemies, or, in particular, the predators. And to that end, it certainly is effective, but you never encounter a predator whilst wielding this weapon, and there are so many more effective ways to take out the rest of the opponents you face. The M6B, meanwhile, is a phenomenally controllable rocket launcher made for pure destruction and given optional homing missiles. Great for dishing out damage to bosses, though if you wish to waste your ammo on lowly alien warriors, it can certainly play that part too. The minigun can shoot through anything in seconds. Get your hands on this thing and nothing which stands before you has much shot at survival. Praetorians will crumple in seconds, while anything less will find themselves immediately turned to paste. They'll be wary of movement restrictions and ammo while firing. Finally, there is the railgun, the game's version of a sniper. You won't see much of this in the game, and it rarely proves useful as a sniper since most of your opponents tend to close rather fast, but don't take that to mean the weapon is weak. This thing is capable of taking out everything but a queen in a single careful shot, and you don't exactly need to be zoomed in to fire it. Thus, in terms of arsenal, the Marine has about everything you could want at your disposal. It's the support equipment which disappoints here. While your trusty motion tracker proves a valuable aid to find everything 30 meters in front of you, the rest of your equipment has spotty use at best. For starters, we have the Marines' methods of seeing in the dark, which the game made far too much of a game of. The flashlight finally makes its triumphant appearance, but like many games released around the time, for whatever reason they included the worst battery in the ever, which lasts a minute or two before requiring a recharge, supposedly under the pretense of creating tension, but it's effectively just a petty annoyance. Also tied to the battery is your infrared night vision, which is worthless. Not only does it eat through the entirety of your battery in seconds, it turns off your motion tracker, disables smart gun tracking, and any light, namely muzzle flashes from your own weapons, will effectively blind you. Why they even included this, I will never know. The more desperate option you have at your disposal are flares, which now have a capacity of 20, though I doubt most people have even used half that amount. Flares light up a small chunk of area for a few seconds, and that's it. With no other utility, such as perhaps distracting a predator's aim maybe, lack of visibility, and the fact that any damage, including bullets, explosions, and acid blood, destroys them immediately, pretty well means you'll be depending nearly exclusively on your flashlight throughout the game, occasionally finding resting spots to relax your battery. The game also tried to be cute and include the hacking tool and torch as seen in the film, but these both effectively amount to occasional keys you have to use in linear passages rather than anything fun, creative, or interesting, such as welding a door behind you to hopefully stem the tide of aliens for a moment, or activating an optional piece of equipment. Lastly, there's the combat exosuit, which I'll get into a bit later. Thus, while nice that some attempt was made and they had ideas in place, little of the equipment feels fully developed or implemented. But here I've gone, talking about all the gizmos and gadgets at your disposal, where what really shines here is the campaign proper. The Marine campaign is arguably the best in the game, being both very well paced and varied. It is also the longest campaign in the game by a hefty margin. In it, you play Corporal Harrison, nicknamed Frosty, a seasoned Marine and tech specialist, assigned under Major McCain aboard the Verloc. The Verloc and her crew has seen better days, having suffered hefty losses, including their platoon synthetic in a recent unseen conflict. Still, they win the distance lottery when the primary operations complex on LV-1201 goes dark, leaving concerns over the fate of the extensive facilities. And the people stationed there, of course. The mission begins rough when, between the vast complex necessitating the platoon being spread thin, bad weather, and the landing beacon being down, your dropship crashes and you and a small team are sent to restore power in the beacon. A poor start, which grows even poorer when a booby trap immediately separates you from your companions, leaving you the only one in position to get the job done. From here, the campaign immediately sets the stage for tension, bringing to the front a patience not far removed from what you see in the films. You explore the complex and hear bits of radio chatter, see the damage which has been done, and get glimpses of something very, very dangerous. But the game holds out on confronting you with it. Instead, they allow you the chance to explore the complex, gather some of the backstory, and hopefully get a feel for the characters. Something which doesn't quite succeed. Simply put, the characters in the Marine campaign are unfortunately bland, a product of a few unfortunate design decisions made. Firstly is the summary notes you get at the beginning of levels, which tell most of the story throughout the game. While these overall tell a good story, they can sometimes seem a bit schizophrenic, especially in the Marine campaign where McCain will laud Harrison's heroics one second, consider having him court-martialed another, want to protect everyone at one moment, then seemingly leave them to die the next. They tried to push for the hard-nosed, experienced officer to stand in contrast with Alien's Gorman, but it's as if they had two writers with very different ideas on how to accomplish that. Second is, there aren't many Marine characters and they never join you. I'll get into this a bit more later, but it's difficult to get attached to any of these guys when a good chunk of the time they're not doing anything. Third, they perform that great classic FPS pet peeve of mine where the player character talks in cutscenes, but never in the game. Why they did this, I have no idea, as they did at one point script Harrison to talk more, but the end result comes off as a bunch of people speaking to a wall, and it doesn't help anyone. Harrison gets less development since he never gets a chance to respond, and everyone else has their conversation die beyond giving you orders, leaving them as more barren as well. So much of the wit both the Alien franchise and Monolith are known for died purely because of this decision. Anyway, little of that takes away from the methodical start, which is the first level of this game. Through careful event scripting, the constant chatter of other Marine squads, and the many notes and clues left, you're given just enough information to let your mind fill in most of the rest, telling you a tragic tale about the downfall of the POC while tensing you up for the inevitable first proper confrontation a full 20 minutes into the first level, leaving you to escape in a sequence not dissimilar to that found near the end of Aliens, with you running down the vents and broken corridors of a dead facility whilst aliens pour in around you and panicked radio chatter follows your progress, telling you of your comrade's plight while McCain urges you back to the dropship in a hurry. And even when you do make it, you're thrown right back into the mix, linking up with one of the squads and disobeying orders to dive into a hive to save one of your comrades in yet another tense offering which, again, calls back to Aliens and the Marines' ill-fated journey into the hive. Here they do a double service, showcasing familiar locales seen during the Alien campaign when the facility was active, now a ruin fallen into disuse. And here again you see one of the strengths of the game and the tragedies of this campaign. Where once was a facility of hundreds, brimming with workers and activity, nothing is left, nobody has survived. There is no Newt character to tell the tale, there is only death, of which you will encounter more and more of as you delve deeper in search of your lost sergeant. of whom the game implies a deeper, though mostly unexplored relationship with, which seems to haunt Harrison for the remainder. Here you'll encounter a few unique design choices made in the game, some of which turn out better than others. In particular, I enjoy how the alien eggs are handled. Some hatch upon approaching, others wait patiently or will never open. Or there's the cocoon victims who will be randomly scripted to either give you ammo or flares upon searching their corpses, will weakly groan, or will burst forth a chest burster. It's a very cool and creepy bit, muddled a bit unfortunately as the chest burster bit occurs too often and the little twerps are oddly aggressive upon birth, immediately nipping at your ankles and proving a pain to aim at. The game should have had them stay within the chest for a moment before running away, a behavior more true to the films, but instead gives them the same AI as a full-grown alien. Like, what? Anyway, as you might imagine, the search goes about as well as expected as you kill Hall's twisted progeny whilst the hive awakens around you, leaving you in perhaps the most tense sequence in the game as endless aliens begin chasing you in a mad sprint all the way back to your APC. And all that was just the first level. I'd like to say the rest of the game holds to the level of quality and tension of this first level, but that's unfortunately not the case. What it does do, for the most part, is keep the reins on the pacing. The second level, for instance, isn't as frightening or difficult as the first level, but does introduce you to a new environment where you will be facing a somewhat different enemy type, or runner aliens like that seen in the third film rather than the more common warriors from the second. It also continues being a carefully crafted experience with your encounters heavily scripted to bring out the most from the highly aggressive though otherwise simple AI. Where it fails though is in one basic aspect: the Marines. The first level gave you enough of an excuse so that, okay, sure, you got separated, then you were undermanned, and then your team was left licking their wounds while you disobeyed orders, so you wound up alone. The second level, you're given the excuse of, Mother thinks that a single Marine just might make it through, while the rest of the team sits warm and snug in their APC. Bullshit. The real excuse is that the game doesn't have AI designed to follow you, so anytime you're given the illusion of being with a companion is a heavily scripted and linear sequence. Unfortunately, here they decide not to even bother with the pretense of giving you a couple early squad mates who get killed off after a bit of linear pathing, a small bit of ambience which could have vastly improved the feel of the entire campaign, even if it would have been predictable. Whatever the case, you're soon off to the third mission, which introduces you to the pods, and here you begin to see some of the real strengths not just of the campaign, but of the game. The pods are a highly secure research base held aloft within a canyon. As vast as the POC is, it's the pods and the research conducted there which is the true treasure to Weyland-Yutani. Headed by the prideful Dr. Eisenberg and secured by General Rykov and his Iron Bears mercenaries, the pods offer something unique within the setting. It's no longer a nostalgia trip retreading the same ground, but a unique story delving into a bit of Weyland-Yutani, and how rogue elements of the company can accomplish great and horrible things on the fringes of civilization. In terms of the campaign, this is a good change of pace at a crucial time. So you thought the entire game would be spent fighting the same aliens with the same weapons while your fellow Marines gave you orders over the radio? Well now, let's throw your jarhead into a company espionage plot of betrayal and murder and see if you can survive. The fun thing here is you get to, as a Marine, experience things from the alien and predator point of view for once, moving through a facility as glorified security guards struggle to contend with you, causing chaos within the station. There's even a bit of creepiness here as you quickly realize you're not the only thing to have escaped. And starting off with a lowly pistol, it takes a while to become properly equipped, a situation the game takes good advantage of, including another tense, if heavily scripted, sequence where a pred alien stalks you through a partially destroyed, gore-filled section of the pods while you're equipped with nothing but a pistol and a knife, not even a motion tracker or a flashlight to keep you company. It's another highlight sequence of the game which unfortunately ends before you realize it, and winds up, as you'll come to discover, disappointingly your only encounter with the creature in the game. Unfortunately, it feels like they couldn't figure out how to end this sequence, and rather than coming up with a couple ways to either solve a puzzle and kill it or escape, made it extremely weak and capable of being taken down with a couple standard handgun shots. In any case, the rest of the pods offer good fun, giving you just enough human enemies to spice up the game without featuring them too heavily. And the facility proves surprisingly well fleshed out, especially in this campaign where you must traverse large sections of it. It is also the section of the campaign where you'll have interactions with the other two campaigns, seeing and hearing about the goings-on of the loose alien carving a path as close as bare seconds prior to your arrival, and even coming face to face with the Predator. Tension is furthered as more and more of the complex falls prey to the violence of the other two campaigns, with a new character, a corporate spy who needs a bit of outside assistance, guiding you along and relaying how bad things are becoming, all topped off by an intense surprise boss fight just as you finally recover something close to your normal gear. Then it's back to the POC as you try to link up with the rest of your team to get the hell out of Dodge, and of course, it's back to fighting alien enemies. The game could have easily fallen apart into a slog here as you encounter the same old, but the developers were very smart in their design. Before, they got you with the tension of the unknown. You know there will be aliens, but when and how many, and what will they be like? Here you're going back to a known quantity, returning to hell. Rather than treating it like same old, however, they make it worse. No longer are you creeping into the dark, cramped corridors wondering if there's something lurking or if you'll find more gruesome evidence of what happened. Now all the corridors are dark and cramped. Yes, there is indeed something lurking with you, and the gruesome reminder of your fate should you fail is everywhere. The return to the POC is the most frightening bit in the game. No longer do you have even the impression of support, and even as well equipped as you become, the threat around you is constant and intense. A threat made all the more deadly as you hear a Praetorian stalking somewhere behind you, breaking through inches of steel plate and promising a dangerous end which you are ill-equipped to handle. Just as you begin to get sucked into a standout alien experience, however, the game reminds you that it's aliens versus Predator, with the deadly advanced extraterrestrial returning to stalk you and, as you come to find out, the Marines you were hoping to link up with. Like the start of the game, you're given a long sequence where you must traverse the complex and fend the monster off, but this time he doesn't simply disappear, finally confronting you in an extended chase sequence of high-powered weapons which turns into, in my opinion, the best boss fight in the game. It is also, a bit unfortunately, the only true fight with a Predator you'll have as a Marine, as well as the last time you'll even see mention of them. But damn if they didn't make it count. But then it's back to the task at hand as you link up with the few Marines left at the POC, just as they meet their demise. Unfortunately, it's a trick they pull just a few too many times here, and you're left to realize that you're truly meant to spend the game alone. Even if you manage to save a couple from the immediate threat, they'll stay in place to secure this area, where they'll be overwhelmed as soon as you turn your back. This is also the point of the game, I should mention, where they stop trying to scare you. You've come back from the brink, trudged through hell. There's nothing more the developer can do to scare you, and they know it. So instead, their focus goes to showing just how good you've become, in part by finally putting the minigun in your hands and asking you to go wild, hunting down the Praetorians which have torn the facility apart so that a dropship can pick you up. The game remains in this line of thinking for the Marines' final level, putting you into an overpowered armored exosuit which you've seen glimpses of throughout as you delve into the heart of the hive to rescue your old squad from a company trap. And it is as awesome as it looks, able to take a beating and including a laser and flamethrower on one hand and a dual minigun and rocket launcher on the other. Unfortunately, things aren't quite sunshine and rainbows at this last stage. First is that, as cool as Exosuit is, it does lack some basic functionality. Like, you can only run, no walking, and there's no motion tracker or flashlight, so it doesn't allow for some of the ambience the rest of the campaign works so well with. More importantly, though, is that this is the part where they should have pulled out all the stops, and they didn't. You plaster some basic aliens, then some more basic aliens. Then there's a combat android and a mercenary. Then more aliens, over and over and over. There's no sense of the hive attacking you en masse so much as a pack of aliens getting woken up every so often. At best, they throw in a couple lone Praetorians, but you were shredding them at the end of the last level without an exosuit, to say nothing of now. What they should have done is give you a steady drip of aliens attacking, with a couple scripted waves appearing here and there with Predaliens and Praetorians in their number. They could have even finished this with another final Predator encounter, perhaps showing small hints that you're being stalked as a prized trophy before a couple of them attempt to ambush you. There was even a dropped plot here which could have served the sequence extremely well. Early on in the campaign, you mistakenly cut the security in the pods, exposing them to an alien breach and killing more than a few. Dunya, an Iron Bear and right hand to Rykov, lost her fiancé during this breach and places the blame solely on Harrison. You hear for a while how she is hunting him, and then it's never mentioned again. Supposedly you were to encounter her again here as she finally found you, but nope. You just plaster some aliens. Then, oh hey, you take a nasty fall and your exosuit is gone, leaving you with just a pistol going into the final boss of the game. How intense could it have been if, after all the fierce fighting I described, in walks Dunya in an exosuit, forgetting all of Rykov's and Eisenberg's agendas to settle her vendetta against you, destroying your own exosuit and leaving you in a deadly race to find weapons or your squad while she chases you through the heart of the hive. This entire sequence feels like such a missed opportunity. Fortunately, the final boss fight winds up pretty good as you find your squad amidst familiar pilot ruins just in time to watch them, ironically, escape on their own, leaving you with nothing but a handgun and the dropped equipment of deceased Marines to fend off a queen in all her glory, and all the minions she wishes to summon. And, double ironically, it's your squad who rescue you, blowing a hole open for your escape while you make a mad dash for the dropship with the hive, complete with Praetorians and even another queen at your back. The ending here is as dark and bittersweet as you can expect from a true alien story. You've survived, and even managed to pull a few Marines out of the fire with you, and have amassed plenty of evidence of wrongdoing on Eisenberg's and Rykov's part, throwing light on some of the company's crimes. But that's it. The facility's gone. The mission failed. You couldn't even manage to pull out a single survivor. Only a handful of Marines managed to escape. As you might be able to tell, I'm rather fond of this campaign. It's so carefully paced that I can't help but be impressed at how much love and care the developers put into it. The story here is also surprisingly decent, with a solid tale of tragedy, mistakes, betrayal, desperation, horror, and redemption, all culminating in a truly bittersweet end. I'm also fond of how much of it is told, through investigation summaries relayed in the objective menu as you encounter relevant information to paint a larger picture and fill in the lore as needed, to found emails and memos littering the facility detailing the struggles many experienced, which hit home with the knowledge that many of them, often made by hopeful, happy, even flirtatious individuals, have been violently killed, often due to the cold uncaring of Eisenberg and Rykov, to the point where even Weyland-Yutani is sending in auditors to question their actions. A shame the main characters couldn't have been developed just a bit more, else this might be considered a truly great story. As to the rest, good as it is, it's certainly not perfect by any means. The AI is incredibly basic, relying heavily on scripted encounters that keep the campaign from falling apart completely. And though they try to include some small measure of randomness in these scripts, it does overall make for an unchanging and overall very linear experience. The lack of friendly AI is perhaps most disappointing, in that they couldn't even go through the motions for a couple sequences, and becomes tiring eventually witnessing dozens of people meet their end the second you reach sight of them. Finally, while the variety of the campaign as a whole was fantastic, that last level truly let down. What could have been a glorious cap to end things on a high note abandons much of the careful scripting and design which allowed the rest of the campaign to succeed. More, it never allows you another shot at a few of the earlier enemy types, which would have been good fun to see again, especially in something as downright fun as the exosuit. As well, and as mentioned earlier, it is something of a shame you never see much use of your secondary equipment, namely your hacking tool and torch. Some of this is by nature of how linear everything needed to be, but it would have been neat to maybe hold off a big bad by trying to weld a door shut, or maybe hacking into security feeds to try and track a predator or predalien during their encounters. Overall, though, it's difficult to argue against this being the best designed and paced campaign of the lot, with consistent and familiar mechanics and plenty of variety. The Alien campaign is fun. Like the previous title, while the Marine provides consistent quality, the Alien gives unique and downright fun content, and that has never been more true than here. The Alien is a very simple creature. You can slash your claws at a devastating pace, stun opponents with a tail whip, headbite most enemies for an insta-kill, jump, crawl, walk on walls, and now pounce to reach significant horizontal distance in a hurry for brutal damage. Simplification made easy with your wider field of vision and pheromone detection, which highlights all living creatures in the game world, though watch out for synthetics and sentry guns, as well as a dark vision for your occasional vent crawls. Lightning fast, though susceptible to damage, you are capable of regenerating health through your victims. Biting heads for the greatest bonus, though watch out for chunking enemies, namely through pounce, else there's no health to grab. You are a living weapon and need no progression to devastate the foes around you. Almost no progression, that is. The game did include one unique feature, allowing you to experience the alien life cycle from the moment your egg opens. But let's back up a bit. The Alien campaign begins 6 weeks prior to the Marines and is primarily focused on two characters. You, a freshly hatched alien, and Dr. Eisenberg. Eisenberg is one of the central antagonists to the overall tale, the head honcho to all operations which occur on LV-1201, and the character focus of the campaign considering it's rather difficult to characterize unspeaking creatures such as the alien. He is also one of two characters given enough characterization to perhaps even be considered good. His tale largely follows his backstory, in which he, in his arrogance, upon first discovering the planet, threw caution to the wind and wound up stranded in a research outpost with no food and a deteriorating group of survivors. He was the only one to make it out, though the cost, as we find, was far higher than you might expect. As such, Eisenberg has grown an intense PTSD surrounding this incident, not to mention an obsession over controlling the hive, which mixes poorly with his callousness toward anything that is not himself, and a pride which has him dismissing any opinions and theories not his own. On the other end is you, the alien. Frequently throughout the game, you'll see reference to the incident, which is blamed for beginning the entire mess. The incident, as you'll come to find, is you. When the Iron Bears try to smuggle an egg off planet, the crate carrying it is mistakenly dropped, allowing you to break containment to find the host. The level which follows is great. You get to see the POC at its height, in direct contrast to the Marine campaign, busy and full of life. People are aware of the dangers, but the facility is so secured that none would dare to consider a single alien as a credible threat, even if it takes out a few folk along the way. Anyway, this arrogance proves true in the early going, as you can't just face-hug anyone. You need to find someone alone in a quiet spot. These guys know the score and aren't going to let you get past this early lifeform stage if they can't help it. And this is a task which sets the stage for the early game extremely well. You're left exploring the POC, hearing snippets of conversation which flesh out the world around you. The segment plays out like a stealth sequence in which you try to find the end where your lone target, a gloriously unlikable supervisor, waits. But the honest truth is that the game was barely designed with stealth in mind, and the sequence was really created to give you some practice navigating the environment whilst developing the world you inhabit as you explore. And it succeeds brilliantly in doing so. Then you burst someone's chest and all the vicious brutality you might expect, and you repeat much of the process as a chest burster, trying to find somewhere safe to grow. Here the stealth suffers. The game begins relying more on the questionable stealth mechanics in favor of scripted world building. But there's still enough going on to hold interest, and the sequence is short enough that it doesn't drag too badly. And just like that, you're a full-grown alien in the middle of a hot box of tasty morsels who don't have any idea what's about to happen. And it's glorious. Threshing through the unsuspecting humans as realization slowly comes to them what's going on is great. Only brought down by the simple fact that the developers did not develop their stealth nearly enough. There are moments, especially early on, where it's entirely possible to utilize stealth and get by the open, heavily guarded locations and save the tasty humans for another day or another facehugger. But the segments are finicky at best, often allowing people to spot you in dark corners across the map or even spawning people in who are aware of your presence out of nowhere. And once they become aware of you, everyone knows exactly where you are. No more hiding. The other issue you'll encounter, though it's not too big a problem once you figure it out, is the fenced-in nature of the POC. Much of the early going is spent outside, which is fine. What isn't so fine is that they give you the ability to wall crawl, then surround the roofs with electric fences, which automatically give you should you touch them without ever warning you. There's no light hum of electricity, no crackling, no warning signs, no NPCs mentioning it. Just, hey, I wonder if this fence will stop it. Death! And trust me when I say, those fences are unforgiving. And sure, they couldn't just open up the wide world to you and expect the quality to remain consistent. There's nothing wrong with some violent linearity to keep you on track. It simply would have been nice if it was a bit more forgiving in how it was handled. Still, the POC sequence for the alien is one of the highlights of the campaign. Well paced, with enemies becoming progressively tougher as they attempt to corner you, and plenty of opportunities to attempt to ambush your prey. All helped along by constant enemy chatter, which really helps fill out the sequences. Pacing which becomes all the more exciting as you begin to see glimpses of a predator also making its way through the complex, causing damage and eventually confronting you in a brutal fight with an explosive finish. Unfortunately, this is where the campaign starts to go downhill. There's a bit of a time skip to link up the time frames of the 3 campaigns, and you're set to enter the pods during Harrison's accidental security breach. The sequence proves severely underdeveloped. Problem 1 is time. Alien levels tend to be shorter than the rest, but here is where it truly comes to fruition. The alien sequence in the pods is the shortest of the 3 campaigns by a good margin, and the following level even shorter than that, being easily completable within 5 minutes, whereas the other campaigns tend to run anywhere from 20 to 50 minutes per level. For the pod sequence in particular, this is largely because there's no grand entrance into the level proper like with the other campaigns. Whereas the Marine and Predator have a lot going on in their introduction to the pods, the alien is shown breaking in, then suddenly you're in some random spot in the middle. Second, the scripting becomes lazy. You'll still get occasional bits of conversation, but they're less common and more awkwardly placed, to say nothing of events. For instance, there's a bit where you're supposed to overhear this grand plan to invade the Hive, which is hinted at being how the event winds up eventually going horribly wrong, only this plan is detailed within a long, monotonous speech which lasts literally as long as the next level. There's not much fluff to it, and if you want to hear all of it, you have to remain stationary inside a colorless event with nothing of interest to look at. This is the worst offender of the scripting pacing, perhaps in the entirety of the main campaign, but it's hardly the only one. Third is progression. The Marine and Predator are, around this point in their campaigns, starting to fight new enemies, gathering new equipment, and are otherwise finding their levels being shaken up. Not so much with the alien. You were born, you grew up, congrats, that's it for you. It might have been nice if, say, you were in the process of becoming a Praetorian, allowing you to gain some of the strength feats you didn't have earlier and eventually give you the ability to shrug off all but the heaviest weaponry. They even included some lore which would have tied in nicely to this, about how growing Praetorians expel pheromones which has them chased from the Hive until full grown, which might have made for a cool level where you must run from the Hive, encounter some of the local flora and fauna on maybe one of the isolated research posts, and eventually found your way to the pods. Instead, your progression halts here, and that's it. It's more of the same throughout the remainder of the campaign. Tied into this as well is the enemies. There's no advancement of them. What's the difference between a standard Weyland-Yutani guard, a fully kitted one of the suited-up alien handlers, and an Iron Bear mercenary? there isn't one. They take about the same amounts of damage, react largely the same, and are all mostly kitted out with pulse rifles with a rare exception here and there. They could have made it so the alien handlers can't be killed with the pounce attack or are thrown prone by it, and are immune to head bites, while the Iron Bears tend to carry more powerful equipment such as flamethrowers, smart guns, and miniguns to mix things up more. But they all carry similar loadouts and are all taken down just as easily as the next, with only the tougher combat synthetics standing in a more true opposition. But they're just one enemy type and a fairly uncommon one. Predators, meanwhile, as you'll quickly come to discover, are all cut from the same cloth. They'll only utilize 3 weapons: their shoulder-mounted plasma caster, their combi stick, and, incredibly rarely, their net gun. That's it. To be somewhat fair, most of the Predator arsenal is designed around enormous amounts of damage which homes in, explodes, and/or would be a hit scan, most of which kills a standard alien in a single hit. So the only real weapons they could have added would be the pistol and the wrist blades, maybe a disc. To be less fair, this wouldn't have been an issue if they'd let you progress into the Praetorian stage, which would have been able to soak in anything a Predator can dish out. Fourth, and finally, the alien abilities aren't nearly as fleshed out as they should have been. Now this is a noticeable fault throughout the game. Marines use their torch and hacking device mainly as rare keys, as does the Predator with their charge emitter. The aliens' big thing is that they're supposed to be able to break through grates and doors, but only certain grates and doors. For the most part, this is a petty annoyance, but whatever. In the pods, this annoyance reaches new levels. Much of the level, you're set on the other side of a grate which you can't break through because reasons. Forced to break through other grates to get to that other side. The entire time I'm wandering through this, I just want to dismantle the unsuspecting guards, but I'm limited because the game has determined that only these very specific grates can be breached. Specific grates which may or may not have an unspeaking guard looking directly at them for no reason. Such an incredible waste of what could have been an amazing sequence. But that tends to be how the next couple levels go. You go through the pods, this amazing feat of design and engineering, and a species best equipped to explore it winds up rushing through a small part of it before the level ends. Then you return to the hive and break through the squads trying to keep the masses of aliens at bay, and the level just sort of ends without much fanfare. The rest of the campaign picks back up again with some longer and far better designed levels, but the tight pacing and scripting of the beginning isn't there. And you can tell they hit a brick wall by keeping you as a standard alien warrior. Like, what's your next boss fight? Oh, it's another Predator. Exactly the same as the last one we fought. And the final boss? Not just one Predator, but 2. This time, one is a lighter variant, while the other is a heavy. We still utilize the same equipment and tactics and fight you one at a time, but they look different. And you have to fight them back to back. Yawn. When the Alien campaign hits, it hits hard and fast and is phenomenal to behold, but it loses its footing halfway through and never quite manages to regain it, largely because of a few unfortunate design decisions which made the Aliens the most stagnant campaign to play through. Finally, we come to the Predator, whose campaign is in many ways a masterwork of game design, though not so much mechanics. Like the Alien, the Predator campaign focuses on 2 characters. You, a so-called Predator Prince or something similar necessitating respect, and General Rykov, a former colonial marine, who happens to have a Russian accent for reasons, turned mercenary. Rykov is the other character in the game surprisingly worth something, and also one of the primary antagonists. He has a history with the Predators, having at one time been seriously injured and left for dead during an attack, for which he has miraculously recovered at some cost, and has since become obsessed with them, waiting for the day he might exact revenge. To this end, he proves a surprisingly effective antagonist, equal parts ruthless and cunning, though also strangely devoted to his fellow mercenaries, if not the company he's been hired by. Rykov might be about the most perfect villain I could imagine for a Predator protagonist, as the nature of the Predator keeps most things as underdogs against even a single one. Rykov proves himself no underdog. Anyway, the genius of the Predator campaign boils down to the level design. Contrary to the other campaigns, the Predator doesn't rely quite so much on scripting, in part due to the fact that your cloak allows you to get away with stealth more fluidly than the Alien, and in part due to how open the levels tend to be. And these levels fit the creature extremely well, allowing the player to go about dealing with threats in any variety of ways with their slew of overpowered gear. But they don't go about giving it all away at once. You're more a hunter this time out, not just a mobile meat grinder, and the level design and equipment choice was created to highlight this, not to mention one simple little quirk the developers added to your character: laughter. Like the previous game, every time you take a trophy you bellow out a roar of victory, but now it's more than that. Every time you decapitate someone with your spear gun, the prince laughs heartily. Every time he gibs someone, he lets out an amused chortle. He greatly enjoys this, and by extension, so do we. Thus, with limited equipment which is still far more than enough for the job, you're set off against the poor, unsuspecting humans in a deadly game they have no chance of winning, and it's glorious. Where the masterwork comes in, though, is how the developers use the setting to showcase the player's status. In the beginning, you are the ultimate alpha, the one in control. The levels are open and there's nothing anyone can do to stop you. As time passes, more of that control is relinquished. Enemies begin bringing out things that can see through your cloak, like sentry guns, smart guns, and combat androids. All the more dangerous when said androids begin equipping railguns, and a few enemies bring EMP grenades into the mix, which will momentarily stun you and sap away all your energy. It's not just the enemies, though. Slowly you find yourself pushed into more and more cramped corridors, losing part of your edge as you fall into Rykov's control. Then, before you know it, you're stuck in those cramped corridors the campaign avoided for so long, and begin to realize, oh shit, I might be in trouble. Trouble indeed, and if not for ulterior intervention of a certain alien and USCM corporal, arguably the most dangerous being on the planet would have met their end. And just like that, you find the opposite playing out. Suddenly lacking equipment in the mid-game, you're set to escape the pods in a tight sequence which, while fun while it lasts, like the Alien, isn't quite developed or explored enough. Still, the fundamentals of the design remain intact. As you regain your equipment and find all new toys to play with, the world slowly opens up more and more once again, bringing you back to your comfort zone. A comfort zone which isn't ever quite reached. You see, it's at about this point in the game that you begin facing off against the aliens more frequently, and they are not so simple to dispatch. Between their ability to see through your cloak, their acid blood, and your tendency to have either explosive, one-shot, or acid-spraying equipment, fighting the scores which come after you can get intense, and there's a few standout sequences which are great fun, especially once the humans start mixing with them more. Unfortunately, the human threat never quite reaches the same level as you see upon first entering the pods. Fortunately, Rykov alone more than makes up for that in one of the better boss battles in the game. The campaign is so well designed, so well paced, and contains so many set-piece moments and so much variety, it's just a shame that the character mechanics get in the way. A lot of problems come to a head with the Predator, and the creature was, in many ways, extremely ill-designed. For starters is the imprecision within the aiming. This is kind of an issue throughout the game, but the Marine and Alien suffer little from it due to how fast their attacks tend to come out, leaving the volume to cover up the problem. The Predator is a far more precise character, so these inaccuracies are problematic. It's simple things like how bombs move a little left of the crosshairs for whatever reasons, or how you might be aiming at an enemy's head, but unless you hit at just the right angle, your spear gun will lodge in at center mass instead. It's the worst with melee. You see, you swing your weapons and you might expect that they hit all the points along your swipe, centering around your crosshairs. Not true, I'm afraid. Instead, every motion creates a number of damage points which will hit vaguely around the crosshairs depending on the type of swing. So, for instance, you might punch something with your wrist blades and you'll have 3 points of contact down and to your right of your crosshairs. Or you might swing your combi stick and hit at 5 points across the swing, but none of them will be on your crosshairs. Hell, it's not uncommon to have 3 enemies practically hugging you, yet a wide swipe kills none of them because, despite it being a wide swing across your screen, there were only 5 tiny points of contact and only 1 or 2 managed to ding some non-vital location. Which I suppose brings us to talking about the Predator's gear, which is weirdly balanced to say the least. There's plenty of variety and a lot of fun to be had, but a lot of head scratchers here as well. The wrist blades are your default melee. Simple and moderately powerful enough to deal with most of the low-level enemies, your default attack allows you to utilize one of a few randomly selected quick swings, while your secondary allows you to charge a heavier punch. The combi stick has a longer reach, a wider swing, and is potentially more powerful, especially utilizing a secondary vertical swing which can devastate most single foes, which makes it the generally more useful melee choice. Which makes me wonder what the developers were doing with these 2 weapons, since they're both available for the vast majority of a game. The wrist blades really needed something more going for them, such as being quick to take out in a pinch or greatly reducing acid damage. But as it is, there doesn't tend to be much reason to utilize them over the combi stick. Then there's your spear gun, which is little more than a basic sniper with a secondary which launches multiple spears. Don't take that to mean this isn't a good weapon, however. Despite its limited ammunition, it's fantastically deadly, one of the most fun ways to gather trophies. Then there's the disc, which is okay. It homes in on locked targets where it will demolish anything smaller with ease, but even simple movement tends to mess up its homing function, and the weapon far too easily becomes lodged in walls, even in wide open areas, needing either energy use or a manual pickup to reacquire. Still, this might make for a suitably deadly weapon, if it weren't for the fact that it disables your cloak, reducing its viability against the multitude of targets you're often up against. Then there's the plasma caster, which is odd. To be frank, I don't like this design of arguably the Predator's most iconic weapon. As usual, it locks in on opponents, typically the nearest rather than what's closest to your crosshairs, but that's fine. I even like that it's not necessarily an insta-kill. While it can be instantly deadly, it requires you to charge up your shot in order to do so, which goes to figure. Dutch survived a direct hit after all, while Blaine had his chest blown wide open. What I don't like so much is that it homes in on targets and explodes for significant splash damage. Like, what? I suppose the developers felt like compensating for the fact that the projectile is relatively slow, but rather than speeding it up or maybe giving it just a slight homing ability, these shots will curve wildly and tend to hit even on rare direct misses. And if you happen to charge up that shot, watch out. Problem is, this often doesn't feel like the classic Predator weapon. Playing against it as the alien or marine feels cheap, like there's few ways to survive projectile spam, a problem Predator enemies can be locked into which can be nearly impossible to deal with. Even as a Predator, it just doesn't feel right, in part because it fills the exact same space as your disc, only better. Like the disc, it homes in for massive damage. Like the disc, it disengages your cloak. Unlike the disc, there's splash damage and it can be spammed. Not the best designed weapon. Next there's your net gun, which incapacitates targets for a few precious seconds, making it viable situationally, but considering your lethality, doesn't seem much use. Or your remote bombs, which are a decent idea limited by the fact that said bombs explode the second you take out another weapon. Finally, you have your pistol, which makes its triumphant return from the previous title, and this time it's somewhat balanced within the game. While it's still an incredibly devastating weapon, its splash damage now affects you, and a careless predator can easily blow themselves to pieces with a single misguided shot. It also taxes your energy stores, preventing spam, if only a little. To make up for some loss of utility, however, and make it the specialized weapon it truly is, The secondary fire lobs 3 shots not dissimilar from the Marine's EMP grenade, which can stun you and drain your energy, but is also capable of stunning even the heaviest opponents, including bosses. It's odd and a bit annoying that this function lobs 3 shots seemingly sporadically, but it's nice to see the weapon finally implemented well into a campaign without breaking it, helped along some by the fact that it's an endgame weapon. Then you have your equipment, which includes your classic visor, capable of highlighting humans, aliens, or predators or technology at the cost of making the others nigh invisible in alternate modes. Or your classic cloak, which will make you almost invisible to most humans until you get in close, but is disabled with use of certain weapons and equipment or upon contact with water. And of course, there's the classic Metacomp, which restores all your health at the cost of half your energy. New to the series is the Charge Emitter, sort of the Predator version of the Marine's hacking device, which sees about as much use. More significantly is the Energy Sift, which arguably breaks the Predator. The Energy Sift recharges all your energy within a few seconds, which pretty well allows you to spam some of the more powerful weaponry in the game without repercussion. It also allows you to enter a vicious cycle of Energy Sift, Metacomp, Energy Sift, which very nearly makes you invincible. While I'm not entirely opposed to this piece of equipment, it probably should have been saved as a late game item with some other method of recovering energy present in the game, not something which comes standard issue. So yeah, the equipment is designed oddly at best, and can make the campaign play problematically. Fortunately, the developers seem to have some handle on this and space the equipment grabs in such a way as to make them all useful at some point, and rarely too off-kilter. But some things, such as the odd melee system, cannot be helped. Unfortunately, this is not the only problem the Predator faces. There's the attempt at platforming with trees which, while well-intentioned, just look at these trees. Fact is, mechanics to get the Predator platforming right didn't much exist at this time, and while they made do, the result didn't turn out the prettiest. There's also the unfortunate part where fighting aliens as a Predator is sort of, not fun. Thing is, the Predator weaponry continues to be ill-suited toward fighting the creatures, or at least ill-balanced in this game. So many of the fights feel like they boil down to using a Plasmacaster, which, with its homing capabilities, proves far too effective. Ideally, the Plasmacaster wouldn't have the firing rate or homing to keep up with the hordes, and you have to quickly switch to melee. Except your melee weapons both take far too long to engage and, worse, spray deadly amounts of acid back at you, making most engagements with them, outside a couple select encounters, either boring or frustrating. All this meaning that, as well designed and varied as the campaign tends to be, it rarely approaches the heights seen in the others. Before I move on, there are a few other small criticisms I have with the game. One is the lack of character models. I wouldn't be too bothered with this for the most part, except they too often use generic models for secondary characters. Most notably, out of the hundreds of security you'll find in the game, there are only 2 real characters. Both of them use one of the generic models used by the hundreds you'll come across. There are only 3 security models in the game. This is a problem shared with the Marines, Iron Bears, convicts, and scientists. Basically every human faction within the game. Then there's the lack of synthetics. While you'll come across plenty of combat synthetics throughout the course of the game, you'll never encounter a single run-of-the-mill version, which I find more than a little odd for such a huge research facility. Similar, the lack of animals. We're told runner aliens come from quadrupeds, but aside from some insects, the local wildlife doesn't appear in the game, nor do any dogs or cattle, though we do hear cats a time or two. Or the lore. While most of the lore fills out the story very nicely, sometimes you'll come across things which don't quite fit. Usually this has to do with the occasional time logs and how they just aren't right, especially when compared between campaigns. Other times it's something more detailed, like how a Praetorian takes years to grow, even though it takes a queen a matter of days? Or there's difficulty. The game can be fairly difficult on just the normal setting. However, it does the classic video game thing of simply adjusting damage values. This works out pretty okay for the Marine who wasn't designed to withstand much damage to begin with, and who can still level most enemies with their vast arsenal. Aliens and Predators, not so much. While the lesser health on higher difficulties is reasonable, and indeed makes things quite difficult, the problem comes in that most opponents both faiths will always be defeated with a single precise hit. Every so often, though, they'll come across a tanky opponent, and the battles which on normal might be considered intense, on hard and above become repetitive and boring. Finally, the levels tend to be a bit too dependent upon scripting to make them fun. Because of this, they're almost entirely linear, and the encounters will rarely change from one playthrough to another. Anyway, this isn't a trudge on the game. It's not perfect by any means, but you can tell a lot of effort went into overcoming the flaws to make this far better than many of the mechanics should have allowed for. A fact which should be obvious to see if you ever witnessed the horror which was the Primal Hunt expansion pack. Primal Hunt was the game's only expansion, and for good reason. I was tempted to make a separate review entirely for it, especially when considering that it was created by a different developer, but I think I'll leave this as one solid block of review, at least for comparison's sake. The basis of Primal Hunt is that it was supposed to be a prequel which tells the story of the loss of Pod 5, an incident you hear of which happened shortly before the main campaign that has the company worried. And it kinda does this? The chronology proper begins 500 years ago, with an ancient predator landing on LV-1201 for a hunt, which is where the title to the expansion comes from. Without any human characters, the story is mostly told through generic grunts and roars, which goes about as well as expected. It does throw you fairly quick into the action, problem being the action sucks. All the lessons learned about level design and counter design and weapon limitations were pretty well lost here, and you wind up with most of your arsenal from go, complete with a new and useless addition in the Plasma Flechette, a sort of plasma machine gun which sounds a lot cooler than it is. You're thrown back into the great outdoors, which mostly consists of a bunch of narrow linear paths. The plus side is that these paths contain some of the local wildlife, so we get to see that. The downside is that the local wildlife sucks. They just stand there, waiting for you to come along before attacking. This works fine for the chameleons, which can hide in plain sight and leap at you for close-range battle, but the more common bulla are like big dumb hell-spawn oxen. The tentacles are the third and final new addition, burrowing worms which explode from the ground to attack, and should you clear them out, the ground rumbles, hinting at something far larger and deeper, which got me a little excited. Would we finally see what that massive skeleton was which we glimpsed in the main Predator campaign? Nope. They just drop it. Should also mention a key piece of lore I was really not fond of. One of the objective reports you pull up mentions how the aliens seem to live in harmony with nature, despite their aggression, and how other species seem to get along fine despite this. And I have to call bullshit. It's meant to be some critique about the wastefulness of humans and how we are the true monsters, but give me a break. Aliens killed off a colony of 150 in a matter of days. They ain't balancing shit. Anyway, yeah, so you hunt some local fauna for a while in this cramped canyon where they do nothing. Then you encounter some aliens and decide to hunt them for a while, chasing them deep into their hive in a series of encounters which are nothing less than annoying. No, really, their idea of encounter design is having 10 aliens spawn out of nowhere all around you, repeated ad nauseum. You hunt them deep into the hive until you encounter this thing, from here on out known as the Artifact. And here I performed a double take. Yes, this is the focal point of the expansion. This Cracker Jack's box toy suspended in a beam of light which looks like it was taken straight from a 90s Power Rangers episode. This is supposed to be pilot tech. Right. The Artifact does something, It looks like the aliens don't like it much as they stay away from it, but only when it's activated. Also, it destroys crates and floats mysteriously. Right. Flash forward a couple weeks and the Predators have built a base around the artifact and you are sent on a hunt deeper into the hive for whatever reason. Then suddenly, random earthquake, the artifact is deactivated and the hive overwhelms the Predator base. The Ancient rushes back in time to watch a bunch of his buddies die very easily, fights through a bunch more stagnant encounter designs, and reactivates the stasis fields to the egg pits? What? You're being overwhelmed by the entirety of the hive and your worry is the egg pits? Whatever. It goes about as well as it should, and the Ancient is put in a stasis along with the eggs and the facehugger, which just so happens to be leaping directly for him. And at this point I have to say, come on. This is the best you could come up with? The overall idea isn't even that bad, but good lord. First, build 3 wide open areas. One's a plain with rocky outcroppings where you fight a grazing bulla. Move from there to a location with a couple trees and a couple more bulla. Only once you approach the trees or try to climb up them, chameleons attack from them, setting you on your back foot. Oh hey, this planet is a bit dangerous. The creatures here are deadly. Then you reach the 3rd space and you witness a bulla wander into a rocky area where it is promptly torn apart by tentacles. So now you have to climb tree to tree to keep from being attacked by tentacles, who are a bit beefier and tougher to take down. And should you try your hand, you get the same distant roar and you know that is what you're hunting. Then you encounter something odd. A bulla has been overpowered and is being dragged away by an alien, and you realize this is a predator's first encounter with the species. You're tasked with following it into this putrid hive filled with rotting bullas and chameleons and even a nest of tentacles which have been ripped from the ground. Still, whatever these aliens are, they seem mostly inactive, until you reach the pilot ruins and find everything in stasis. An entire enormous hive kept still at the moment the complex was overrun. Yet still something managed to escape and is rebuilding an active hive. Cue a battle with a young queen. A couple years, not weeks, later, and the Predators have made a base within the ruins and are harvesting the aliens for their hunt. You are tasked with delving deep underground where the problematic tentacles nest, hoping for a glorious new trophy. And you find it, the Big Mama herself, and manage to mortally wound it. In its death throes, however, it destabilizes the region, causing a massive earthquake which knocks out the stasis fields. The hive is awake and free. You rush back to the ruins and, one by one, try to re-engage the fields, only to have the inevitable happen. There. I just fixed half this campaign in the space of a paragraph. I'll even do one more solid. The Ancient doesn't get the entire arsenal from go. You get the wrist blades, net gun, bombs, pistol, and a far beefier plasma flechette. Later, you can get the disc too. Or how about this one? For the first level, you don't have your alien vision. You must fight them without it. Now you are outfitted differently than normal, must play differently than normal. Go make do. But no, you wind up waking up 500 years later, a few months before the events of the main game, in the ruins of your old base built on top of the pilot ruins, which unfortunately looks far too similar to the Predator technology outside of coloring with the generic lack of detail, so the contrast isn't there. Your mask is somehow intact though, and there's a dead facehugger sitting next to it, which makes for a cool segment. You are a doomed predator. What do you do? Apparently, try to recover the mysterious artifact for reasons, which kinda comes out to a cool sequence. The artifact has been taken by another character, Dunya from the main game, who you play as in the mercenary campaign in this expansion. You're set to follow her through the ruins as aliens attack all around. Problem being, the designers still haven't figured out gameplay. Aliens are dropped around you 4, 5, 10 at a time, over and over, in these cramped quarters that don't look particularly interesting and don't have the benefits of notes or dialogue to at least give the sequence some character. You reach the exit to the ruins and, okay, guess the level ends here. Now let's go to the pods where I guess you can just jump to the top without any trouble. Alright, now, I have to stop here for a second. The pods were supposed to be this heavily secured location. The main campaign makes a big deal of them. Getting to them as a predator was a whole sequence in the main game, and even as the alien, it takes the entire system being shut down in the Marine campaign for you to break in. Here, you just sort of enter. Congrats. And oh hey, the aliens are now here too. What? This is supposed to tell the story about how Pod 5 fell, and your explanation is this ancient predator came. Then some aliens followed too. That's a joke, right? Anyway, you make your way through the more cramped aspects of the pods until you reach one of the only highlights of the entire expansion. You enter a room and security forces and aliens are in this huge free-for-all which you walk right into. It is amazing. Then you grab the artifact and make your way to send a distress beacon. Because apparently they needed a reason for predators to hunt on LV-1201, a deadly planet full of prized game. Just in time to give birth to your very own beautiful baby chestburster. Here's an idea. The ancient tracks Dunya back to the pods and notices a water main which connects to Pod 5, which is made mention of as a weakness in the mercenary campaign. Your destruction of security as you make your way through allows the aliens to follow in after. And hey, since I'm doing away with the idiotic artifact idea in my version of the game, how about we give a real reason for the ancient to be chasing Dunya? Like, she steals cloaking tech, which would probably be considered a pretty big no-no. More, since your mask was destroyed by Facehugger and your cloaking is gone, now you have to attack this human base without two of your biggest support equipment items. Now, instead of gunning through the humans with your spear gun and plasma caster from the shadows of your cloak, you're doing so with your pistol and plasma flechette. Something completely different. Then, instead of sending the stress beacon like a little bitch, after grabbing the stolen tech, you find a quiet place to activate your self-destruct to destroy both yourself and the tech, only to suddenly birth a chestburster. There, exciting, new, bittersweet, and fills in a ton of gaps in the lore. And I managed to come up with all that on the spot. Not difficult. So let's move on to the mercenary campaign, where you play as Dunya. A few seconds in and, hey look, a new character model. In fact, let's stop and talk about this for a second. It's not a huge deal in the grand scheme of things, but it bothers me. In this new campaign, Dunya is given a new look, and voice actor, but what are you gonna do? To make her not look like a generic Iron Bear. Okay, cool. They even give us new models for these two unnamed characters who die within the first 5 minutes. Great. That's it for the new human models. There's a couple new characters introduced who play a role throughout, but they reuse the same models of Chekhov and Ivan from the main game. Characters who will also both play a role here. Or Dmitri, Dunya's doomed fiancé who plays a more prominent role. He's stuck with his same generic look. They sure changed his voice actor though. Hell, they even changed his accent. It went from a Texan accent to a Russian one. These design decisions blow my mind. They can't even get the simplest things right. Anyway, Dunya is sent on a secret mission in the Zeta site, a research area where the company found predator tech mixed with pilot tech. Her purpose is to go deep into the hive where nobody has survived to get and recover the artifact. Okay. How do you know about the artifact if nobody has survived to even reach it? How do you even know what it does, and why do you have any interest in it? Hell, why is Rykov interested in it? Rykov is obsessed with predator tech, not pilot. Whatever. You go to Zeta to find the place has been pretty well overrun, and here's another one of those highlights to the expansion. You make your way through the outpost, gasp, with a team. Now, of course, they're heavily scripted, so as you make your way forward, they're set to a direct path through the facility. Still, it's nice to fight alongside someone for a change, and I can only imagine how much this would have improved the Marine campaign if a simple segment like this was included a time or two. That's not all, though. You're also allowed to dual weld pistols now, which is only slightly less useless than welding one. You can set up sentry turrets, which are always good fun, and have a brand new motion tracker which can see in all 360 degrees, if at slightly less range. Still no flashlight with a battery worth anything, but I'll take it. Anyway, you and your squad make your way to the hive entrance to the ruins where you're attacked by overwhelming amounts of aliens and they both die off. Problem is, they're not scripted to die. The aliens have to kill them and they're kinda decent at surviving. Also, mission failure with friendly fire, so watch your heavy weapons. Now you could, of course, leave them behind here, but the aliens are scripted to keep coming until both these guys die. Thus, this cool last stand moment winds up dragging a little. Then a lot. Then it ends and suddenly you're in the same position as the Ancient in their campaign, having all the equipment in the world you could ever want. Developers didn't seem to understand that games tend to need some limits that the player works around. If you give a player the most powerful guns from Go, there's a lot less tension. Of course, they tried to create tension by attempting to overwhelm you with aliens who often spawn from literally nowhere. No, seriously, it gets bad in this campaign. At one point, they quite literally fall from the sky in droves. Still, the run to the artifact is pretty fun. And that's the last of that you'll be having in this campaign, at least for a while. Dunya gets her hands on the artifact, has to wait for a hacking sequence because whatever, and rushes to escape the ruins as aliens close all around her. And yeah, problem is the Predator ruins don't have anything interesting to look at. Oh look, there's a trophy wall. Ooh. Aside from that, nada. They're bright, stale, and the encounter design sucks. Hell, they even managed to fuck up the eggs. Remember how earlier I described the eggs having some measure of scare or randomness? Not here. As soon as you approach an egg, they open. Even when it's 5 of them sitting together, they all open together. Anyway, Dunya manages to exit the ruin and look, it's daytime. And look, it's some of the indigenous wildlife, which has managed to survive directly next to alien-infested ruins. The level is designed to be this tense chase back to your APC, but is completely ruined by the fact that it's broad daylight in the open. They could not have thought up a worse setting for aliens to be chasing you if they tried. Maybe a field of flowers on a bright sunny day? This isn't far removed and not helped by the fact that the encounter design is horrible, in large part because you can practically see them spawning. So great, you have the artifact. Now what part does Dunya have to play in the fall of Pod 5? Not much of one, it turns out. You're just relaxing in your room when you get the call that the pod has been breached. Go get the artifact. Okay. 3 steps out of your room and alarms are blaring and an alien attacks you. Like, come on, have some consideration for pacing. If this were the main campaign, you'd exit your room and see scientists and security scrambling around. As you step closer to your objective, you'd see an alien pounce on some hapless victim and you truly know things were getting serious. Here, they've already overrun the facility, and there you were, just chilling in your room 5 feet away. Anyway, you reach the artifact in time to watch it being taken away by the Ancient. Then you're told, hey, we're abandoning the pods. Get out. So you make your way down to the elevator where you find out while you've been doing a whole lot of nothing, Demetria has gone to seal the breach. The fuck? So in the story, which is supposed to tell about the fall of Pod 5, you play a character who stole an artifact, watched it get stolen back, and escaped while somebody else dealt with the whole Pod 5 thing. Whoever came up with this had no clue what the hell they were doing. The one positive to this is the turret defense sequence you get at the end, where you try to hold out long enough for Dimitri to make his way to you so you can both escape, which is a genuinely cool sequence as you and your sentry turrets try to stem the tide. And again, I don't feel it would take much to fix this. Instead of being sent for the mysterious artifact, Dunya is sent to secretly salvage some of the Predator tech. She goes in with her team and doesn't meet much resistance, until they get past the defenses. One is quickly disposed of and the next isn't far behind, and in her mad dash she comes across the old stasis chambers. She manages to nab the cloaking tech but damages the stasis field in the process and makes her way out through a ruin of Predator and pilot architecture caught up in the malfunctioning stasis. She manages to find a way outside via explosion rather than a magical door which Weyland-Yutani has conveniently missed, and in the dead of night rather than the middle of the day. And it's a mad dash back to the APC with aliens spawning way behind her, chasing her down and causing her tracker to go crazy. Then, just as she thinks she can relax back at the pods, she gets a call about the breach and the alarms start blaring. You hear security calls for teams to take positions, for personnel to evacuate, and make your way down to the water pump where you link up with Dimitri. There you must halt the waves of aliens long enough for Dimitri to set charges which would close the gap. Even so, though you manage to stop the greater threat, Pod 5 has been overrun and you evacuate as it is blown free from the rest before the outbreak can spread further. Done. A simple story about how humanity dug too deep, woke up something they shouldn't, and the fallout to that. Not difficult. Finally, we come to the Predalien campaign, and I don't even want to talk about this. It's so disappointing. This one should have been a slam dunk. I mean, you really gotta try to screw up the chance to play a Predalien, especially in a story about the downfall to a facility. Yet, here we are. The Predalien campaign begins after the Predators make a home in the pilot ruins, just as the earthquake happens, and tries to follow the example set by the main campaign. You are a facehugger, stealthily finding your way to a lone target. And soon enough, you'll find this isn't quite right, because there are plenty of lone predators you can find, but none of them are the correct lone predator, and you will fail the mission. Whatever. So you make your way through this maze of a facility, and it's shit. Maybe someone should have told the developers that playing stealth against a creature whose vision highlights you isn't the best of ideas. Now I get it. The idea was there. The place is being overrun, and you skirt past as this is all happening. Reality is, you see an occasional fight, usually with your alien buddies being dispatched within a couple seconds, and the predators are free to hunt you again. What's more, the level design here is awful. You're being railroaded, yet the game gives very little indication on where you're supposed to go, which mixes poorly with the fact that the predators can see you across the room and are armed with little explodey plasma guns which home in on you and can kill you in a hit. Eventually, you'll survive to find your way to the correct predator, a certain familiar ancient, just as the stasis fields come online. You then wake up at the tail of the ancient campaign as you burst from his chest to begin the next phase of your life cycle. Here again, the idea isn't bad, but man did they screw up the execution. They had it in mind where you wander through the facility as it begins to fall, weaving your way through while aliens and humans fight. To that end, it works somewhat better. Problem is, you're again stuck in these stealth sections with no clear indication on where to go. For whatever inane reason, they had the idea where you, as a chestburster, scare people into opening certain doors to progress. So dumb. Fortunately, the level isn't too long, and you're over being helpless. Unfortunately, that's 2 levels down. For reference, each expansion campaign has 3 levels. As well, the first 2 life stages were both longer and took up a single level together in the main campaign. A few hours later, and you're all grown up. The facility is in shambles, and it's time to feast. And of course, you're given the objective to find the artifact. At first, it's exciting to be in the body of the brutish Predalien. Big, powerful, and able to take a pounding, it has a ton of potential. Then you realize the developer knew nothing about encounter or level design and fucked up one of the main mechanics. One of the big problems you'll notice quickly is that, though you have a ton of health, eating people doesn't give you much back. Seems they tied your regeneration directly to your hit point number rather than health percentage. Further, since you're a big bad Predalien, you tend to encounter a lot more heavy weaponry than normal. And also, a lot more sentry turrets and combat synthetics, neither of which regenerates your health. Meaning, chances are you'll be spending most of your time with very low health and no way to regenerate it. You'll also find that, by this point, Pod 5 is pretty well done. Most of the damage has been dealt, you're just sweeping up the leftovers. And that artifact thing doesn't happen. Some Iron Bears pick it up, great job done ya, and the facility begins exploding, so you decide to book it while the rest of your alien buddies decide to stop the squishy humans from getting away with a tech which does stuff. Let's put this another way. You facehug the Predator, who manages to reactivate the stasis fields despite you, are born in the fires of Pod 5 after it's already been lost, and watch as others duke it out over the MacGuffin while you tuck tail and run for the exit. This plot sucks. How about, when you grow up, you find that Weyland-Yutani has pretty well secured the breach and are on the verge of regaining control of Pod 5. Then, rather than searching for the artifact, you set out to annihilate the defenses from the inside, splattering both helpless victims and all-powerful exosuits alike until the company has no choice but to cut their losses and destroy the pods before you find a way to breach into the others. Hell, showcase the Predalien's additional strength while you're at it. Let it tear through all but the hardest doors as it rips through the facility. As a Predalien, you shouldn't be walking into the chaos and watching it happen. You should be the cause of the chaos. This is the incident before the incident, and you made it happen. But no, this campaign lives and dies on a whimper, along with this shoddy mess of an expansion and any chance of a sequel despite a cliffhanger to the main campaign. As to the game on a whole, Aliens vs. Predator 2 isn't the best made thing ever. It falters here and there, but there's a lot of veteran design decisions made which more than make up for its faults, and a lot of heart put into the experience to create something memorable. There's a multiplayer available to the game which, as of making this, is still available with custom servers, but I'll keep the focus here on single player. If you're a fan of the series, this is a must-play title. Each of the campaigns, though, containing their own unique problems, each tell surprisingly decent stories while providing a good bit of variety, for the most part. Even if you're not especially into the series, FPS fans are likely to find a lot to love, if they can get over the ancient graphics, crashing, and glitches. It is a true tragedy that this is a title which seems doomed to be forgotten, as I'd argue it's currently the best the Aliens vs. Predator series has to offer. As to Primal Hunt, skip it. Even if you're a diehard, there's little value to be found in that embarrassment to this forgotten classic.